Rick is going to tell us about when he got shot in the forehead in Mogadishu.
Exactly. So I leave 7th Special Forces Group, and I was lucky enough to go back to the Rangers. And so I end up at the 3rd Ranger Battalion and on a program called Crosswalk, where an SF guy who started out in the Rangers could then go back to the Rangers once he did a tour in SF. And so I get to 3rd group, and I was an E7, I think. They just fired the battalion ops sergeant, who was an E8. And so at that time, you were an 11 Bravo Sierra if you were an SF guy, or a Victor if you were a Ranger guy. So the battalion CSM was an SF guy. And so he brings me in, and I'm telling him I'm here on Crosswalk, I'm going to take a platoon. And he goes, not so fast. He said, I need you as my ops sergeant. And then he says, I know you got O&I, so you're going to be my ops sergeant major. And I'm like, okay, got it. And he said, but do it for a year, and then you go back down to a platoon, and all's good. And he says, you learn the battalion and all the personalities, and I'll let you pick your company and your platoon. I'm like, all right. So my wife is pregnant. I mean, she's like extremely pregnant. And so the battalion goes to Texas. I think they're doing some training in Texas, and I stay behind because Mama's pregnant. And then B Company rolls back in and says, hey, we're going to Bragg to train up. We got to go get Mohammed Farrar Aidid. And so under UNISOM 2, they'd stabilized everything in Somalia with the exception of the Heber Getter clan, which was in Mogadishu. And he had killed a bunch of Pakistani peacekeepers, I think. He was using food as a weapon. And so we said we were going to go and get him. So we did a 10-day train-up with the national guys. And then we come back because the Joint Staff had not signed the deployment order yet. So I walk in the house, my wife says the baby's coming tonight, and she knows because that was our second one. So the baby's, she says water, and I go get her a glass of water, but she means her water broke. And so we get the bag, we go up, because we're close to Martin Army. So my little guy pops out, and I look at the time, and I'm like, man, I'm gonna be late for formation, I better call. So I call up, and they say, ooh, we left at 02. They signed the deployment order, and we figured you were at the hospital, so I said, what do you need me to do? They said, well, there's a list of names at the staff duty desk, a list of weapons, get 2 vans, and get these kids out of school, and then meet us up at Fort Bragg. And we're fixing to deploy. So I go back to my wife, I held the baby, I gave it back to her, and then I had to take the car keys, right? So I left her basically in the hospital, poor lady. But the battalion wives show up, and they took perfect care of her after that, and then I go off to Somalia. And so in Somalia, we did about 7 missions kind of the same way, right? We'd infill by air, we'd reinforce by ground, we'd exfil by air, by ground, and they figured us out. They figured out if they super elevated on those helicopters, they could shoot one down, and they did. So our speed was our security, right? As long as we were in small gun teams, we could keep moving. But once we were tied to a piece of terrain, i.e. a helicopter, then they could get their teeth into us, and they just circled like hornets. And so we initially we took every able-bodied ranger off the wall, and we had the cooks, the clerks, the ammo guy, the comms dudes, everybody who was a ranger got a gun, got a vest, get on the truck, and then we went out initially, caught some of the convoy coming back off, and they were wounded. We had to thermite the trucks and get the radio gear off the trucks and get them back in. But by the time we got back, our truck's down, so we got to get another truck. And so we go out a second time. We're going to meet the 10th Mountain guys coming in from the north, and then go east to one of the crash sites. But we got repulsed, and so we ended up going to the port, getting Pakistani tanks and I think Malaysian anti-armor vehicles. But my guys now are they're the dismount crunchies to pull security for the tanks. So we're in a cargo Humvee, and so they'd have to offload, go forward to the tanks, keep the skinnies off the tanks, and I'd have to count them all back, make sure I didn't leave one behind. They'll be wounded, put them back in the truck, and we're taking minor wounds the whole time, and the truck's getting shot to pieces. And so we finally get out there. My Easterbrooks was the kid that was driving, and he gets hit. And so there's a dead driver drill where you pull out on the throttle and then you throw him up on the hood. And then I was in the TC, so I crawled over the transmission hump, and then he pulls in, and it was his hand. So his hand's like hanging. So he just throws it in my lap, and so I'm steering with my leg, and I'm putting a pressure dressing on his hand. And so then I'm going, and I just push back my helmet and go, damn, this sucks. And all of a sudden, burp, 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 we get hit again. And there's an RPG that hits across the hood, and it blows up in the alley. And when you're under a lot of stress, and the adrenaline, everything goes to your eyes, right? It goes to your core, and everything slows down. And so you can actually see the egg boom. I remember my head snapping back, and a spurt of blood coming out, going, "Oh man, I just got killed." And I'm laying there, and we got slouched rather, and all of a sudden, because we've been fighting for 12 hours, so I mean, you get prickly heat everywhere. I feel like you guys do right now, right? You're just itchy, and your shoulders hurt, and your back hurts, and you got a headache, and you wish somebody would shoot you. And so all of a sudden, all that's gone, right? All the pain's gone, the noise is gone, and I'm following the light. And so I go to the light, and then I'm like bathed in the light. And this is some no kidding pristine light. And I mean, we're spiritual beings, right? We're made in the image of God. Mm-hmm. But we're trapped in these meat sacks that decay the moment you come out of the womb, right? And so we're really limited on what we can see, what we can hear, what we can feel. But once you're in the spirit, man, the colors are just amazing. And this bright light was so bright. It wasn't like, I can't see it. But you're also bathed in the light, and you're like, man, I feel pretty darn good. So every emotion that you have that's positive, all these words that we try to make up to say, I feel ecstatic, or I feel loved, or I feel, all these words, you gotta feel those words. And then all of a sudden, judgment starts, because in the Bible it says, fear God and keep His commandments, because you will be judged. Well, then the judgment starts. And now all the negative stuff starts, and you're just overwhelmed by that. And then I think, man, what am I going to do about my kid and my wife? And then, boom, back down on earth. And there's a difference between up there time and down here time. So in the Bible it says, like, what is it? The day is like 1,000 years.
Exactly.
1,000 years is like a day. So by the time I open my eyes, I got guys hitting me in the back of the helmet going, do not stop here. And they go, go, go. And they push the helmet down to kind of stop the flow of the blood, mash the accelerator, and drive on out. Jesus. And but what happened up there took a lot more time than the probably seconds that I was down here. So there is this thing called eternity that's out there. I will tell you that, and it is nothing compared to what's down here. But when I got medevaced, I was a head wound, so I was one of the first birds out. But I started actually feeling pretty good. And then there were kids that we had 75 Rangers wounded. I think we had 19 killed and about 75 wounded. And so guys that were like splayed up the front, splayed up the back, splayed. So I'm sitting right here getting ready to go in to see the doc, and they're like, hey man, move him to the next chair. So I moved there, and they wheel some kid up. and so by the time I start at this end of the tent, I'm all the way down at the other end. So I asked one of the nurses, can I clean my face off? And I go in, and I clean my face off, and it's not bleeding anymore. So I'm like, you know what, that was probably some concrete, blunt trauma, just hit me in the head, knocked me loose for a while. I'm going back to the hangar. So I go back to where they do the triage, and I'm getting all my gear up, and I go back, and that's when we knew how bad it was. So when you get back to the hangar, you're packing up all your buddies' gear, and you're putting the rucksacks and the duffel bags on their bunk, and then you're counting all the heads going, oh my God. And then the weapons come in, because I collect all the weapons. And so you got to put all the weapons in a pile and say, okay, if we take the barrel off of this one and the lower receiver, because there'd be a bullet hole here that busted the gas tube, or one that right here you couldn't get the magazine out, or one that had the magazines and just there was just so much, bone chips and blood on it. So we reconfigured all the stuff. Anything we could save and clean up, we did. Anything else had to go into the trash bin or the burn pit. And then about 2 or 3 days later, that's when the surgeon got me, and he goes, "You're AWOL." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I feel fine. He goes, no. He said, "It doesn't work like that." And he goes, "Follow my finger." So I'm following his finger, and he goes, "That's an entrance wound." He said, "You have a head wound." And then I said, "No way." And so I go in there, and I get they can't do an MRI because it's metal, right? So they do the CT scan. And then in the CT scan, these two doctors come out, and they're looking at this, and they say, we're looking at a dead man. There is no way you should be alive. We're looking at a dead man. And I'm getting kind of worried, you know. I'm sitting there, and I'm going, "Well, what do you mean? Am I going to die?" And one of the doctors, they were both younger guys. They go, "I'm afraid so, Sergeant." And I got my head in my hands. I'm like, "Oh man, I just had a kid. How much time?" Well, he goes, "We're all going to die." He says, "But obviously this isn't going to kill you now." And I'm like, "Oh man, you guys." So I got up, and I took about 3 steps, and I went, and I fell over, and I started doing this on the ground. They're like, "Get the crash cart." And then when they come up with the crash cart, I opened my eyes and said, "Got you." I got medevaced to Germany, and then from Germany to Keesler, because they had an Air Force doc on Keesler that he was like the frontal lobe trauma dude in the military, and so but I'm feeling good. And when we were in Germany, everybody was saying, "Yeah, we read the story of a guy who shot himself in the head with a nail gun, and they just left it in there." I'm like, "Oh yeah, leave it in there. I'm feeling fine." And so I get to the Keesler, and I tell the doctor, "Well, they were telling me over in Germany there was a guy who shot himself in the head with a nail gun. They just left it in." And he goes, "Okay." He says, I worked at Cook County Medical Center in Chicago, and he says, "I am the #1 trauma dude in the United States government." And he says, "But hey, Sergeant, you probably know more than me." He said, "But how about we just keep you under observation for a couple of days, because in 24 hours, I guarantee that you're going to beg me to operate on this thing." He says, "You don't even know what's in there." He said, "There's so much trash in there." He says, "The infection in your brain will shut you off like a switch." I'm like, "Okay, let's do this." And so he was digging in there, and he's telling me this afterwards. He says, "Yeah, I got in there with this probe, and I was debreeding dead tissue." And I'm like, "Dead tissue? I know what debreeding is. It means you're taking out dead tissue." So how much did you take out? And he goes, "Well, if your hand was a ball of clay, you put your thumb in here." He says, "About that much." So I'm doing it. Well, I'm like, "You gotta be kidding me. Aren't I gonna need that?" And he says, "Nah." He says, it hit the left side, but it left the right side alone. It just stopped between the 2 lobes. And he says, "I couldn't get it out." I'm like, "Really?" So it's still in there. And he goes, "Yeah." He said, I didn't want to dig, because the brain's not like, meat. And I didn't want to start digging in there and shut you off, because you had all your faculties when you came in. So he said, "We just got to stay here and monitor for infection." So he would do a CT scan, and it got infected. You could just see the infection growing. First it's like a dime size, and it swelled up to a quarter. And he goes, "Man, we got to kill this." And so he'd start here, and he'd do a bag every stick, but it got to the point where the veins would collapse. So they put in a little main line that went into one of the large arteries out of the heart. They would just hang right underneath my pec, and they'd come in and hook it up. And so the nurses were so busy that they would one time they left the bags, all the bags, and so by the time they came back, I had them all set up. We're Rangers, right? We know how to do an IV. She just set it, and she goes, "How did you do that?" I said, "Well, you check the date, you check for floaties, and this is mine. I put it up and run the line, and boom." So I'm ready. She goes, "All right, you can do this." And so then she would bring me the stuff, right? And then that turned into I could go to the med locker and get my own stuff. And then I'm like, "Man, I feel really good." It's just I got to beat this infection back. So I started walking up and down the stairs, and that turned into running around the track. And so finally, I had a mean doctor and a nice doctor. The mean doctor came in and was chewing everybody's butt, saying, "That Ranger is out there running around the track, and he's going to kill himself. And you guys are letting it happen." And the nice doctor said, "Hey, listen, would you rather have him go down here well, we got all the crash carts and everything we can get to, or you wanted to go back to Fort Benning and run around the jump towers. So they said, okay, but send a nurse with me. So I had like a rotating nurse schedule, so that there were some that liked to lift weights, there was some that liked to swim, and there were some that liked to run. And so depending on what the workout was for that day was who I drew for my escort. But I think I was there for 3 months. Got a clean bill of health and stayed in for another 10 years, I think, after that. So.
Thanks for that story. I really
Easy
wanted
day.
to hear it out of the horse's
Oh, yeah.
mouth. Well, tell us what the Rangers do, brother.
What's that now?
Tell us what the Rangers do.
What, the Rangers? The premier assault force for the United States, yo.
That'll work.